Hello. Today we have Dr. Glen with us. Very unusual marriage between psychology and astrology. He has written many books, and he will bring you messages that will make you connect with yourself in ways you never thought possible. Thank you, Dr. Perry, for being with us today. I have one of your books in my hand, Psychology. Did you guys ever think that stars could link to psychology? How did you link the two?
Jeez, I feel like I've been doing it all my life. So, I got started learning about astrology when I was in high school. And then when I got out of college and I was finally done with that phase of my education, I just started reading psychology, astrology, other books on philosophy and metaphysics, and eventually...
Why astrology? Because astrology is an unusual field. A lot of people can get into psychology or other fields, but astrology, as if to me, is for selected few.
I think that says it. It's kind of more of a calling.
Yes.
It sort of pulls you into itself.
So as a child, you had interest in the stars, and if they had a message that they were bringing forth?
Well, I think I always had an interest in mystery and just what was beyond what we could see and touch. Early religious upbringing and ideas of heaven and after death and things like that. And I just was always kind of mesmerized by that concept that there was something beyond. So anything that could educate me in that area, I was curious about. So at some point I just came across a simple book on sun sign astrology, and I began to compare the descriptions with my observations of friends and family members, and it was like magic. It was like a door opening and light bulbs going off and synapses connecting, and I was hooked almost from the very start. So even though I didn't have a lot of time to study astrology while I was in high school and college, it was always in the background, kind of hovering and waiting for me to get out of school. And when I finally did, I sort of dove into it, and it's been a love affair ever since.
So when a client comes to you, what do you do? Do you work as a psychologist, like one goes and sits and talks, or do you work as an astrologer? You look at their chart.
I do both, actually. It kind of depends on whether they contact me as an astrologer, in which case I do an astrological consultation and I make reference to the chart. And if they contact me as a psychotherapist, they may or may not know that I do astrology. If they do, then it's simple. But if they don't, after the third or fourth session, and there's what we call a therapeutic alliance has been established and a certain degree of trust, then I ask them for their birth date and time and place. And of course they're curious at that point why I want that information. And I tell them that I do astrology, and if they have any questions about it, I answer, and I explain to them it really helps me be a better therapist for them, and that I don't necessarily talk about and won't necessarily talk about the chart with them, but it's kind of like an X-ray, and it deepens and accelerates my insight into whatever the presenting problem and concern is. So it really facilitates the whole therapeutic process in a way that nothing else that I've ever come across does. There's nothing else that even remotely compares to it.
So the zodiacs become a guiding tool for you in your therapy sessions. And what sun sign they're under and their aspects in the chart gives you clues into their reasons for where their blocks or need for therapy lies.
Yes. Invariably, what happens when a client comes in for therapy is they have what's called a presenting problem. So you say, why are you here, and how would you like help, and what's your concern, and those kinds of questions. And usually, although not always, but most of the time, there's some external situation. They're having a problem in their marriage, or they're not married and they want to be, or they've got issues with career or authority figures or whatever it may be. And so astrology, because it's a symbolic language that describes both the internal psychological world as well as the external event world, when they tell their story, you locate their story in the chart. In other words, the symbolism of the chart is going to be consistent with the nature of the experiences that they're having in the outside world. And then what you do is, in a sense, translate that story, that external experience, into the underlying psychological factors that are determining, or not simply the corollary, but that are the underlying cause of whatever difficulties and struggles that they're having. So it kind of helps you, as a psychotherapist, identify the relevant psychological issues or conflicts that are giving rise to the nature of the presenting problem the client comes in with.
And you are a founder of a school of synthesis that integrates relevant concepts. I see this from your book, from a number of different traditions, astrological, psychology, and spiritual. Tell us about the spiritual side of things that work into astrological and psychological.
Yeah, well, that's when it gets into mystery, and in anybody, I suppose, is less on solid ground when you get into those areas, because it's a little bit more speculative. But I suppose the bottom line is that
is it
astrology.
Their belief system?
Pardon?
Their belief system that somehow brings blocks, or that the spiritual part, is it through their certain belief system? You know, like they're religious, or lack of belief, or that
That kind of gets more into the psychological end of things.
That's right.
For me, the spiritual side is, why is it that the nature of the event world and the nature of the inner psychological world match up so clearly, in such subtlety and yet detail and specificity? It's just endlessly fascinating. I mean, there's what we call a synchronistic, acausal connection between the inner world and the outer world. And if that's so, it suggests that consciousness in some way is non-local. The consciousness of the individual links up and resonates with a larger collective consciousness in which each individual is embedded, which orchestrates itself not only to mirror the internal world, but also to provide certain kinds of experiences that seem to be like a key that unlocks psychological potential. In other words, the experiences that we draw to ourselves, the nature of the relationships we have, the work we do in the world, the various problems and challenges that we face, are both vehicles and catalysts for a developmental process. So it seems like something kind of magical but intelligent and purposeful is orchestrating events in such a way to facilitate a growth process that allows for integration, development, transformation to occur, that allows the person to evolve toward a higher state, and one might surmise, from a spiritual perspective, back toward Source, back toward God, or whatever your word for a higher power is.
So the zodiac is a tool for the collective consciousness? Is that what you're saying? That you use in order to help an individual to see their blocks?
Yeah, the horoscope, or astrology in general, can be used as a tool for helping people gain objectivity and insight into their own psychological makeup, and to deepen their sense of responsibility for their own lived experience, for the nature of the events and relationships that they attract. So in that sense, the more you can begin to recognize that you're responsible for and participating in the nature of the experience that you have, then the more your sense of choice is increased. Your awareness expands, and that can liberate you from old stuck places that keep you in a state that causes suffering and frustration.